Hi, it's Dr. Casoni. Today I'm going to be covering a single herb that is very important. Its primary function is to move the blood. This herb is called Persicae semen. When we look up herbal medicines, they're categorized into primary functions. That is their main category. So this herb is a blood mover. That means that the primary diagnosis for its application is going to be blood stasis, or patterns where there is impaired circulation of the blood. In today's video, I have prepared an AI image to represent this plant medicine. So here we have our image, and in this image it is a female who is wearing red, and she is in a red room, and what's next to her is a blood clot. Because remember, this image is trying to teach you the functions of the herb. Notice the walls are red, which are indicating the primary category, which is the same as the primary function. It supports the heart and it's neutral in its category, which means that it can be taken for longer periods of time if appropriately dosed and moderated with complementary herbs. The related signs and symptoms are going to be based on patterns of blood flow impairment primarily. For example, heart palpitations, chest pressure, shortness of breath, especially with exertion. The person goes upstairs and they feel more winded than they should be. Tachycardia, which is a rapid heart rate. We could also see varicose veins showing up, which are the bulging veins in the legs especially, maybe even spider veins. Hemorrhoids, which are varicose veins in the anus. It's really still a varicosity, but because of the location, it can be irritated by stool pattern changes or from labor, but ultimately it's still a blown out vessel, which makes it a blood flow impairment situation. In this picture, notice the blood clot next to her. This represents poor blood flow, which can turn into clotting. Consider this herb for the prevention of ischemic stroke. Ischemic stroke is where the blood is not moving very well and it can clot. And if it does that, then it prevents blood flow and then there's no oxygen and something is affected. Something may die. That is what we call an ischemic stroke. It is from a clot. So this herb would be very good for that. Can be in the prevention of that if we think somebody has blood flow impairment that could lead to that. But this would be contraindicated for hemorrhagic stroke, which would be where the blood vessel ruptures. And because there could be leakage of blood in the brain, then anything that's moving the blood, or think of like an aspirin or a blood thinner that's thinning the blood, could actually make it worse because the bleed might not stop right away. Spike protein comes from COVID, and that also could be a presentation that this herb would be used very well for, and indeed it was one of our main plant medicines used in post-COVID effects. Notice that she is showing pain in her face from menstrual cramps and has her hands by her lower abdomen. So if you can remember this in this picture, this is because oftentimes dysmenorrhea or painful menstruation is because the blood is failing to move very well in the uterus. Once the hormones are orchestrating the timing and the pace of the period itself, once they're triggering the uterine lining to fall and shed, it should be moving very nicely, which is going to be a pain-free menstrual cycle. But if the blood is sticky and stagnant and the blood is not moving very well, then the uterine lining will fail to fully come off, and that's where the cramping starts. The cramping in the cycle is based on that pain from the uterine lining failing to fully come off, and that's where the blood of the menstrual cycle will be darker and clumpier. And that's where this herb is going to be used very well. So we'll see that there are signs of this blood flow impairment showing up in more than one area of the body. In conventional care, these all become separate conditions, but we could see there's actually a connection of a blood flow impairment in multiple parts of the body. Even painful joints can be part of a blood flow impairment phenomena, because if there is blood flow impairment in the joint, then there's going to be inflammation, and then we're going to have degeneration, etc. Other pathologies related to blood stasis of the lower compartment, fibroids would be in this category, so we would use this herb in these following pathologies. Ovarian cysts, which have more than one component. They have a hormonal component, but there's also a impaired blood flow component. Enlarged prostate, cancers of the uterus, ovaries, cervix, prostate, and testes, recurrent infections of the genitalia, retained lochia after birth. There might be failure of the uterus to come back into shape and fully dislodge any retained tissue. So we're using this herb and this category to fully support that. It is a bitter herb, which is a classification. We're going to get into that in other videos, but bitter herbs are draining function, and in this capacity we can see its effect draining the liver, which is very beneficial for anything that has a functional liver related issue. Consider this for blood stasis liver related headaches. Oftentimes chronic headache will just be a blood flow impairment from the liver, and if we help that liver, the chronic headaches disappear. Especially we see the chronic headaches or the PMS headaches related to that crampy menstrual cycle. We can think that it might be the liver plus blood flow. It can also be used to treat fixed abdominal masses, right? Painful masses in the abdomen, which may be complicated, should be seen by a medical doctor to rule out anything serious. Could be tumors of unknown origin and trajectory. However, this is also at least a blood flow impairment situation, and this herb may be a player in supporting treatment. She is sitting on the toilet because this particular plant medicine also improves gut motility. It's not surprising because it's getting things moving, and especially in the lower compartment, that it also improves bowel function. So it can be used for those with constipation, which is why in the image she's sitting in a toilet. It is a sweet herb, and that is a tonifying reference, right? It's lubricating the intestines, it's adding to the mucosal lining integrity while it's moving, supporting motility. So it's actually very beneficial that way. And many of the seeds do have that function. Because it's moving and because it's lubricating and supporting the motility and the mucosal lining, it also can be used to treat intestinal abscess. It wouldn't be used by itself because likely abscess is going to have infection, but you combine it with an antimicrobial herb. So we're treating the infection and creating movement with a great success. So abscess might be like appendicitis. As I mentioned earlier with, for example, joint pain, this particular herb can help with joint pain, but also a trauma, even a sports injury. And in this case, we have the knees, which are being injured by the toilet that she's actually kind of folded into. So it's an image to help you remember that the herb can help the trauma to her knees, which represents post-trauma support. So you get an injury, there's always going to be a blood stasis component after, and that part of the healing can be treated by sports massage, acupuncture, even cupping. These are strategies that are simply moving the blood to increase the rate of healing. Well, internally, you would use herbs that are moving the blood, and this particular herb would help that. There are some additional functions for this herb. Primarily, it's a blood mover, but it can also help with the bowels that we've seen for constipation, and then also notice that she's having a difficult time breathing. This herb helps to stop cough and wheezing. For sure, if you had somebody who was constipated with painful periods and had some joint pain and also some headaches, With a cough and a wheeze, we might consider this herb to be a perfect fit. As mentioned earlier, also for COVID, this was one of our star players. It could be considered for other chronic conditions as an herb used in combination with other herbs to treat asthma or the COPD category. Similar to the intestines, can be used to treat lung abscess. Additional blood stasis related conditions, blurry vision, because it's a single artery system to the eye. So when we have any blood flow impairment to the eye, we're going to see blurry vision. So commonly we're seeing it from the diabetic who has sugars that are too high, which are inflaming the blood vessels, or we see post-COVID, people get blurry vision because the blood flow has been impaired. Hair loss for the same reason, the microvascular pathways. So when those are affected, we lose hair. There are more than one way that we lose hair, but when it's a blood flow related pattern, then that's where this herb would shine. Erectile quality issues, diabetes, neuropathies, arthritis, musculoskeletal pain, restless leg syndrome, and infertility. If we're not shedding that uterine lining successfully, there's going to be complications in pregnancies. If you know pulse diagnosis, you could see a blocked heart pulse. You might see a purplish tongue, right? This is what a pink tongue looks like right here, but then we could see a purpling tongue. This tongue even has a thicker tongue coat, which is a reference to the gut health, but you can see that the tongue body color is purple, which is indicating systemic blood flow issues. Contraindications, these are categories where you should not take this plant medicine. And this is why you don't want to take plant medicines that are retailed out there if you don't understand what they do, because every plant medicine does have a contraindication. So if you're moving the blood, you wouldn't want to take this herb if you're pregnant, because moving the blood is not going to be good for that fetus. If there is idiopathic menorrhagia, if we don't know the cause of bleeding, then we have to investigate a little more carefully so that we don't exacerbate it or worsen it. And also, of course, just bleeding disorders in general. Oftentimes, bleeding disorders require circulatory support and herbs like this, but you have to know your differential diagnosis so you can understand what are the causative factors, what to look for so that you know you're on track, what are the other biomarkers so that you know where you're at within the case. We suggest you download the Casoni Wellness app for updates, classes, posts in the discussion groups, and announcements. You can get it on the Google Play or the Apple Store. And then also here is our disclaimer that you can read at your convenience.